Hello and welcome to Ask an Author with Julia Kelly. I'm really thrilled today to have an author on as a guest who I've been reading for years and who was very good to me at the very beginning of my career. So in advance, thank you for that. Michelle, do you want to introduce yourself and introduce the book you're going to be talking about today?
Yes, hello. I am Michelle Gable and I love Julia's work. So I was happy to support you early in your career. I am the author of 5 novels, and my most recent is The Bookseller's Secret, which just came out a few weeks ago. And takes place in World War II, and it's about the author Nancy Mitford. So that is my most recent book.
It's really wonderful. And I hope, because we were talking a little bit beforehand about how there are fewer people, I think, especially in the US, but really everywhere, who know about Nancy Mitford. More people should know about her. So I'm hoping that this
Yes.
makes some people really interested in reading her books, because she has such a fascinating story herself. And then, of course, she's part of the infamous Mitford family as well. So perhaps you can tell us a little bit about what people will find with this book, both Nancy's story and then Katie as well.
Well, you're exactly right that not, especially in the US, most people have not heard of her. Even my friends who are historical fiction authors who I think that it's automatic. It's a crime if you don't know about her. She was an author. She kind of was up and coming. I mean, her first books she didn't really become famous till her 5th book, The Pursuit of Love, which came out right after the war in 1945. But she was part of the bright young things in London during the 20s, sort of those aristocratic bohemians. And her first few books published in the 30s. They weren't a flop or anything, but they didn't really make her a household name. And I first read, my favorite of hers is The Pursuit of Love. And I read that, I can't even remember. I don't know if it was high school or college. And since then, I've been a huge fan. So I've always loved her writing. It's very modern, it's very fresh, it's hilarious. And a lot
Very
of it,
funny.
especially, yeah, I mean, just the funniest descriptions in The Pursuit of Love, as I'm sure you know, is a lot based on her childhood. And it's just quite the wild childhood, even though her father was a baron and she was a peer and all this stuff. But it was one of those like crumbling sort of gentries where they lived in this huge house but like didn't have any money. And there were 6 sisters and one poor little brother. And the dad would like send his dogs chasing after them on child hunts.
Yeah, instead of hunting foxes, he was hunting his
Yeah.
children, which is really macabre if you think
Yeah.
about it.
And they would laugh about it. And so these people, they'd be in the Cotswolds, and people would be going to church on Sunday, and you'd see these like little blonde girls running across and then these hounds chasing them. And it was just outrageous. And a lot of The Pursuit of Love, it's fiction, but a lot of it's based on her childhood. And then I got very interested in Mitford about when a book came out 20 years ago, and I have it right here. It's called The Sisters, and it's
I've
nonfiction.
read
And
that
it's,
book actually.
oh my gosh,
It's
it's
wonderful.
it's so good. It's by Mary Lovell. So I highly recommend it. This came out 20 years ago, and I was just fascinated. I bought it for Nancy, but I stayed for everyone else. As I mentioned, there's 6 sisters, and you can sum them up. This gives you an idea of the extent, or the people that are watching, I know you have an idea of the extent of their shenanigans. I guess you could say you had Deborah the Duchess, Diana the fascist, Decca the communist, Unity the Hitler confidant, Nancy the novelist, and then Pamela the countrywoman. She's kind of boring, but she was also a bit of a fascist herself. And after I read this, you can imagine the antics going on in this house with such wild political beliefs on all ends of the spectrum. And the mom would joke, and I'm sure you've read this, that she would see in the newspaper, the headline would read, Pierre's daughter, dot, dot, dot. She's like, oh my gosh, like, what did one of my children do this time? And I knew I wanted to always kind of write about the Mitfords in some way, but I never really knew how to approach it until, I came to the idea for this book, which my agent actually brought up. I was kind of struggling with what to write for my 5th book. And she's like, well, I know you love Nancy Mitford, and she did work in this bookshop, Haywood Hill, during the war in London, in Mayfair. And I love Mayfair. It's, such a cool place. And, I think that could be a good time period. And it seemed perfect because I was struggling to write what to write for my 5th book, and she was struggling with what to write for her 5th book. And so then hence the modern day character of Katie, who's now, she has a lot of problems that I don't have, but she's also struggling with her writing career, and she's younger than I am. But so that's where she comes in, and there's a lot of my own personal writing angst kind of through her, although she has a myriad other issues that she's contending with that I thankfully do not.
So you meet Katie at this real crossroads, and we should say this is the dual timeline of Katie's story and then Nancy's story, specifically during the
Exactly.
war, right?
Yes, yes.
So Katie comes in and she's at a bit of a crossroads, and she's a bit of a mess, as many writers are. If anybody
Yeah.
tells you they're not, they're probably not telling the truth.
Right.
And
Or they haven't
she,
accepted this yet.
or they haven't accepted this yet. Yep. And she sort of has this fairy godmother in her friend Jojo, right? Who says, come to London, figure out your writer's block, figure out what's going on. And Jojo kind of drops her into this magical world of this incredible bookstore that's a real place, right?
Yes, yes. It exists today. They actually supply the Queen's books. They will supply, if a new hotel is starting and the hotel wants to have a library, they'll do that. They'll consult on people's personal libraries. So if you say, well, I'm really into books about the moon landing or whatever, they'll help you curate a library, but then they'll also completely help you just pick that one book that you really want to read. And you can also stay there. There's an Airbnb apartment above the bookstore, which is kind of cool.
It's very cool. It's very cool. So what do we find? Again, I know I always want to tread the line of being careful
Yes.
about how much we talk about, but there is a mystery that Katie kind of becomes wrapped up in and is curious about, and that is around a work of Nancy's that may or may not exist at this bookstore.
Yeah, she finds out that Nancy, and she's like I am, she's been a long time fan of Nancy Mitford, but never really thought about her life, more just a fan of her work and maybe her sister's antics and that kind of thing. And she goes to this bookshop, and she sees that Nancy Mitford worked there. As in London, all over London, there's these little blue plaques that mark significant places where somebody lived or stayed or worked, and it said Nancy Mitford worked here, and she's immediately drawn in. And then she's kind of hearing about there might be a missing manuscript, because there was quite a gap between her fourth and her fifth novels, and she talks a lot about writing. She wrote 8,000 letters in her lifetime, Nancy did, and she talks a lot about writing other stuff that never came to fruition, which that's very common. We all have that. But
We do. Yeah, it's true.
Yeah. But then she notices like most of the letters are missing. Like she can't find any of the letters from during the war years, so it makes her want to dig deeper. And and of course it's all, and any writer can attest to this. Often researching something kind of helps you procrastinate and not worry about your own writing. So in some ways she does want to find out. In some ways it's also good for procrastination, but it kind of leads her back into, what she loves about writing.
And so when we meet Nancy in the narrative, she is recovering after an illness. We know that. And she's just about to start this job at this bookstore, right?
Yes. Yep. She's working there. It's kind of surprising because you think she's the daughter of a peer, her dad's a baron, but she needed the money. She had to work there. She wasn't just like, oh, it'll be fun. Like some of us think it might be fun to work in a bookstore, and she's very well read, of course, so it helps. And so she takes up this job, and she's kind of she's in a very bad marriage. She's also like gets into a relationship, which is separate from the marriage. And she's just kind of trying to figure out what she's doing with her own. So she's at a crossroads too, and she's nearing 40, trying to figure out what to do with her life. What is if she's not going to have children, what's going to happen with this marriage? That's not going anywhere. He's off fighting, but still, even he comes into town, he doesn't see her, and so she's trying to figure out what to write. She's trying to also she's also grappling with that sense. She's friends with a lot of male writers like Evelyn Waugh and people like that. And she's also kind of like, oh, they can just write a book and it's fine. And like Evelyn's, in the Marines, and then he leaves, they'll give him a leave to write a book, and he dashes off this book, and he's like, oh, it's so easy to write, so she's also grappling with that whole bit of it. Like, okay, it's so easy for you. Men are allowed to just like hole up and go write their book, and women, she was not allowed to do that.
It's interesting seeing her kind of contrasted with her friends, because of course her friendship with Evelyn Waugh was famous, But then I think
Right.
it was also a bit of, maybe we would call it a bit of frenemies situation these
For
days.
sure.
They
Yeah.
were so sharp to each other, and they could be,
Hmm.
he was famously tough to be a friend
Oh
with,
my
and he
gosh.
isolated,
Yes.
and he was a drunk too, which didn't
Yeah.
help.
No, it did not.
um, but no, he really, I think, sounds like, and the way you've portrayed him in the book, is a difficult person to be friends with, but also you kind of see some of the charm also. So she's kind of got these people around her that are
Yes.
all in this world, in this literary world.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's, so that's like both a kind of push and pull for her, right? It feeds her because then she feels like she's in this literary world, but then it also kind of makes her upset, especially dealing with him, where he's like, when she wrote The Pursuit of Love, he's like, great job, you wrote half of a good book. And she's like, okay, thanks. That's just, and like you said, that's kind of their relationship. But she relied on him a lot. And I think he relied on her a lot as like a stable influence. And he had a lot of respect for her. That he could ever give her any compliment was a lot from him.
Yeah, absolutely. And she has some significant women in her life as well. Can
Mhm.
you talk a little bit about some of her relationships with those people?
Yeah. Well, for one is Anne Hill, who was Haywood Hill, was the owner of the bookshop. Now it's his wife. So she was a friend of hers. Her sisters, of course, she had very difficult relationship depending on which sister was. Uh, you know, there's some question about whether or not she did report her sister, who was the fascist, to the government, and which ended up in her incarceration. So she has a lot of that. She also had a friend called Hellbags, who was
Great name.
yeah, that was her nickname. It was like Lady Helen Dashwood. They called her Hellbags, and she was kind of a hellion, this gorgeous, titled woman, and that was another friend of hers. And so she did, it wasn't just men. It was women too. um there was other people kind of in her circle too.
I think one of the really interesting things about this book was I didn't realize how much Nancy Mitford did during the war. Um,
Mhm.
where do we find her in terms of her war work and kind of the different things that she's occupying herself with? And I'm being very careful with how I say that because there's a lot in there. So I don't
Yeah.
know what you want to start with first.
Well, she was very interested in wanting to help people. She went like with her husband to try to help during the Spanish Civil War and help with people evacuating from the Spanish Civil War in the late 30s. And then at the beginning of the war, she was helping in like first aid stations, like band-aid, bandaging people. And then they opened up their home, their family's home in London, to refugees from the East End. See, there's a cat behind me.
We're always very
Hi,
friendly to
Kipper.
cats on this show. So they're always the
um,
stars.
yeah. So um so they opened up their family home to East End evacuees as during the Blitz, as the East End was getting demolished,
Mhm.
right? People, different homes opened up to these people, and so she opened up their family home. Her parents, her dad was off doing, in his country home. He didn't like to be in the city. The mom, she was very anti-Semitic. She's like, oh, I don't want Jewish people in my house. So she kind of disappeared. And Nancy was taking care of a lot of these people. And there would be 40, 50 people at one time. She did a whole holiday celebration for them around their holiday. She also did Christmas too, but around their, different
Right.
holidays as well. And so she did take in a lot of these, refugees from the East End and try to help find them. She would try to help find them schooling or placement or whatever it was that, they needed, or helping them find. She would go back into the East End and try to help them find their furniture or anything that might be left in the rubble of their houses.
I think it's so interesting because it's kind of in contrast to the more acerbic side of Nancy
Yes.
Mitford that maybe some of us know her for as well.
Yes.
Again,
Yes.
like Evelyn Waugh, she could be really sharp
Oh,
and
for sure.
I imagine tough to get along with
Yeah.
sometimes.
Yeah, her mom would say like into every letter she tucked a small knife, because there was always some little, in all her writing there was some little like jab. And she would take them also out to her friend's house. Her friend had a big house out in the countryside. She would take some refugees out to that house to stay there. So she was trying, and it was out of a genuine sense of wanting to help. Like she could have turned her back and said, like, no thank you, I don't want to deal with this. And she definitely wanted to help. And she always, a lot of her time, she felt kind of incapable of helping to the extent that she wanted to. And I think this was her opportunity to help on a little deeper level.
Yeah. And then there was her espionage work, or
Yes.
so-called espionage work. And
Yeah,
I kind of can't imagine a worse spy than Nancy Mitford,
exactly.
because she's not known for being discreet.
No. And so it's kind of funny because you can say, well, was she a spy? Was she not? I personally think it was more just because she openly talks about in her letter, she's like, oh, I'm a spy now. Ha ha ha. Like writing to all her friends, like, I'm
Right.
like, well, you're not that clandestine if you're just, and like you said, she's the last person you would, I would never tell a secret to her if I didn't want it to get out.
Right.
So they had her go to the Free French, the Free French were in London. So that's where their government was based out of. And she was told to go infiltrate the Free French Officers Club and kind of find out what they were up to. Like, were they really Free French, or were they really Nazi sympathizers that were
Mm,
pretending to be Free
okay.
French? So that was like her version of spy work. And then she ended up having this romance with one of the Free French officers. But I don't, so the friend worked for the office that was in charge of all the spy activity. So I think it was like a family friend was like, well, let's find out what's going on. Like, Nancy's very
Sure.
personable, she speaks French, she can talk to anybody, we'll send her into the Free French Officers Club and see if these people are really, on the up and up. They're not really just trying to pull the wool over our eyes. So I think she was like a semi spy, but she loved it. Like, she would brag about it constantly. And you're like, okay, maybe not such a good spy.
So one of the things that I'm getting from this is that you obviously had the ability through her letters and the things that you were able to excerpt. You must have been able to draw on a huge amount of material for researching this book.
Yes. But what was interesting, as I mentioned, is not a lot from the war period. So the part with the manuscript, I made that up. Like, that's not, as far as I know,
I can't go to Haywood Hill and ask them to peek in the
yeah,
back room.
no, you
Okay.
can't. Sorry. I mean, you can try. Maybe I'm onto something. I don't know. But so that gave me kind of, and all my books are based on real people or real situations. And it's all kind of in that gap of true, like, the truth, and then like, well, what happened in this period? This period's kind of weirdly blank, and then just filling it in with fiction. So that was the same with my last book about an affair that JFK had, early in his career before he was married. Kind of like filling in the gaps. So, but I was able to draw on so much. So the letters are very scant that are available publicly in those, later war years, like 42 to 45. There's some here and there, and even and in Evelyn's books of letters, there's a few here and there, but it's funny. It's like, feels almost like they were purposefully taken out. I'm not sure
Which does happen
why.
sometimes. Certainly,
Yeah,
people
absolutely.
selectively edit their letters or have their loved ones do that after the fact.
Yes, exactly, exactly. And it is her, so her sister, the one that was a Duchess, her family ended up buying the bookshop, and it's still in the family. So her
Mhm.
nephew owns the Haywood Hill bookshop. So I think there's definitely some selective editing in that sense. And so I let my mind wander with that. But it was nice. Those letters did help with her voice, her friendships, her dynamics with other people, her thoughts about her family members, and all her world was so big. It was actually a shame I couldn't include more people. There were so many
Yeah.
interesting people in her world. There's 6 girls. She's just 5 sisters and a brother. That was a lot in itself, but
Yeah, the
it,
family itself is just huge.
yeah, yeah, and fascinating. Like, at first I was like, should I combine some siblings? Should I do? And I'm like, no, no, no. I need to give everybody their full due. But it was hard because it's not about them; it's about her. But yeah, so it was her prolific writing was a huge help.
What are some of the challenges with writing about real people? I know you said you've obviously based other characters in other books on real people as well. What do you find when doing that is kind of what are the barriers and what are the things that you enjoy?
The barrier, I would say, is the fact that I have to remind myself of writing fiction. I can spin myself up like, oh, why can I not find any letters from 1943? Like, let me fly here and do this and do that. I mean, I could do less of that because I wrote this, in 2020, but, I have to remind myself. And I remember trying to figure out in my prior book, like, if JFK was like in New York on a specific week. And I'm like, what? It doesn't matter. Like, there's nothing saying he wasn't. And if somebody wants to come at me and be like, actually, he was not there, and I'd be like, okay, well, good job. It's not a biography. So that's a big challenge for me
Mhm.
about when to like let the imagination go and just know that like the facts are the scaffolding, and
Yeah.
then
Do you
that's
have
the biggest
a
challenge for me.
do you have a general sort of guideline for yourself about sort of when it feels right to let that sort of adhering to the facts go and let the artistic license take over?
Yeah, I usually try, my goal is usually to make it that it's plausible. So I won't do anything that's purposefully, unless otherwise noted. I might have said like, oh, well, I combine these 2 months. Like I might combine 2 months. Like if one thing happened in October, the next thing happened in November, maybe I make them both happen in November or something like that. And I would note that in my author's note. But generally, I want to make it plausible. So there's nothing that you could point to be like, well, obviously that didn't happen because
Mhm.
she was dead or whatever. Like I'm not going to do anything to that extent. And I try to make it emotionally true, like, well, of course, Nancy would never do that. Like, why would you have her, I can't even think of anything off the top of my head, but that kind of like suddenly she joins some far right political movement. Like she would have done
Right.
that. So I try to make it emotionally true. Just plausible is my goal. Plausible.
I think that makes a lot of sense because you're trying to breathe life into a character who was a real person, but they're also your character at the same time. So
Yes.
it's your
Yeah.
interpretation of Nancy Mitford, right?
Right, exactly. Yeah. And so plausible is always my thing. Well, like that could have happened. I'm not saying it did, but
I'm really curious to know about writing about some of the real places, and I'll tell you why. I'm a member of the London Library, which
oh,
appears in your book,
yes, it
and
does.
famously, and in fact, for some bizarre reason, I was chatting with a friend the other day, and I thought, I actually don't know that much about the history of the London Library. So, for those of you guys who don't know, it's an independent library that's a subscription base here in London. So, it's not associated with any councils. It's not a government library or anything like that. It's a library that you can go. It has tradition of a lot of writers. Charles Dickens was one of the founding members, all of that. So, it's this kind of institution, and it was bombed during the war. And you have a
Mm.
scene where Nancy and Evelyn and some other people as well are going through and sorting through all the books that
Yes,
remain to see what's actually worth keeping and what's not worth keeping. So
yes.
I love that specific detail of seeing a
And
place that
she
I
did
know really
that.
well. Yeah, exactly. So incorporating those bits of London into this book must have been a fun challenge, hopefully.
Oh my gosh, that's the best part. You'll notice all my books take place somewhere that's, Paris, London,
Somewhat
Nantucket,
glamorous.
yeah, or somewhere just very fun. First of all, then I can go visit. And then second, I just love to bring in, I have a little bit of Rome in one of my books. I can love to bring in those details. And there's so many great details in London. There's so many little neighborhoods and this and that, and so many little cool, not, I don't want to say quirks. I mean, I guess that could be quirks, but little things here and there, the London Library, which was when I read that she had helped with, kind of sorting the books. I'm like, okay, that has to go in there. That's such
Mhm.
a cool little detail. So I do love trying to bring the place to life as well as, the characters as well.
Were you able to go to these places for research? I know it's one of the challenges that a lot of people have had during the pandemic.
Not not this time. I've been to Mayfair a lot, so that was helpful. I would have absolutely gone again because, of course, it's a good excuse.
Naturally.
Yes, and I've walked by the bookshop. I've never been in it, which is a shame. So I've spent a lot of time in Mayfair, and I know London pretty well in that sense. So that was helpful. I think I would have been a little bit nervous if I was writing about, some city I'd never been to. I would have been like, okay, roll the dice, because there was no, especially because I was writing this, in early 2020 to mid 2020. There's no going whatsoever.
Right. Yeah, I think that's one of those interesting, unique challenges where you have to kind of figure out how to get that detail in there, either through previous knowledge or through other means. Was there anything that you found particularly helpful in the writing process?
Sometimes I would look and just, I would like try to find firsthand accounts of things, because the book, although it doesn't say it, it is kind of like post, quote unquote, post pandemic. It takes place in late 2021, so it's not really post pandemic. But
Mhm.
I tried to like find some people who were talking about just kind of what the city was like now, without it being too over the top, like everybody's wearing masks. I didn't want it to be. There's a few subtle comments, but nothing. I didn't want it to be overwriting, where you're thinking about the pandemic during the modern day pieces of the storyline. So
Mhm.
I would try to like look at people's Instagrams or blogs or things like that that just kind of talked about like subtle changes.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm really curious about the writers who are both kind of at this place in their careers where they're not entirely sure where their career is going to go. So you have Katie in the modern period and then Nancy before she writes The Pursuit of Love, which we know is a massive success and
Yes.
sort of makes her name as an author,
Uh-huh.
even though she had had these previous works out. Where you mentioned that you were drawing on some personal experience. So can you talk a little bit about why you wrote that particular storyline into this book? Because it felt very familiar to me. I'm not gonna lie.
Yeah, I've had a lot of my writer friends are like, oh yeah, they're like texting me pictures of it, like, yes, I relate. So a lot of it had to do with I'm at a this is an I had the same publisher for my first four books, and this is a new publisher. So we were going to we were leaving my prior publisher and going to a new one, and I had written a different book, and it was set in Nevada in the brothel in the 1860s. Okay, so
That's
but
an actual thing because
yeah,
that's
yes,
mentioned.
yes, it is mentioned. Yeah, and so I mean, my agent loved it. Like editors loved it, but they're like, "Oh, nobody wants to read about that." I'm like,
Huh.
"Okay, but until they do, right?" And and I got some of that pushback, when I was first back in the day trying to sell my first novel about other time periods and other things. I had a lot of novels I didn't sell before we sold the Paris Apartment,
Same.
which was my first book, and but we got a lot of pushback before, but I'm like, okay, wait, but now I have four books under, all my books have done well. Like I have four books under my belt. Like I've proven that I have a good track record for sales.
Mhm.
So like, why can't we roll the dice? And it was kind of funny because my agent's like, okay, well, we can keep trying with your brothel book. And there's an agent, Bianca, in the book, which is based on my agent, Barbara. And she says some of the same things. Bianca says some of the same things Barbara did. And the book is actually dedicated to Barbara. She's like, okay, well, you can keep trying to push this rock up a hill, or you can play ball. And she's like, and everyone's like, well,
Yeah.
what about another book like A Paris Apartment or like World War II? I'm like, I am not doing any World War II. I'm like throwing this fit, and then my agent's like, well, what about Nancy Mitford? I'm like, damn it, that's a good idea. Because she's like, well, it's up to you, but you need to decide. And I had a little bit of what I injected this a little bit into the Katie character, though it's a little different. But I worked for 20 years in finance before I quit to write full time. And I was, for my first two books, I was doing both. And I loved my job. Like I loved it. They would give me time off to like do book tours. They were so supportive. It was such a great job. I adored my job. I loved everything about it, but it just got to be too difficult to do
Yeah.
both well. So I had to make a choice. And it also paid better than writing too. And so it was like, so I injected some of that. Her situation's a little different because her career wasn't quite as like all encompassing as mine had been. I was like an executive, tons of travel. So, but still, I did inject kind of that where you're like, wait, okay, so I don't get to write what I want to write, and I left a job. A lot of writers have day jobs that they didn't like, that they're like,
Mhm.
oh, thank God, I'm not doing that anymore. And that, like, I think it's kind of unique to have a day job that you liked a lot, that was hard to leave. And I have a lot of, however silly it is, like a lot of my identity was wrapped up in that job.
Yeah. I can
I worked there
understand
20
that.
years. So it was that was that piece of it. So a lot of that, where she says, she even has Katie's first book was called A Paris Affair. Mine was A Paris Apartment. So I even put that in there. A couple times my editor's like, you should probably back off a little bit here. Okay. Understood. Because I was just like, why does it always have to be this? It's nobody wants to read that until somebody wants to read it, like where the
Right.
crawdads sing. Like nobody's like, give me a swamp book, and then that came out, I'm not saying
Right.
my book was Where the Crawdads Sing, but you get it. Like so but then
There are definite sort of,
yeah.
it gets proven in publishing and then it's okay to do it. But there's I think a lot of people don't realize how much risk there is involved. And
Yes,
so
yes.
publishers tend to be, because it's a business, tend to be
Risk
unwilling
averse,
to take
yeah.
that risk. Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly.
absolutely. That's exactly right.
They want the sure thing, right?
Yeah.
So Katie is of course feeling this pressure of the sure thing.
Yes, exactly.
And with Nancy, it's a little different because she hadn't, whereas Katie had had success with A Paris Affair, Nancy hadn't really had that success. And she had a flop right when the war was
Yes.
really starting to actually ramp up.
Yes, like her fourth book, was a huge flop. It came out, everyone's like, it's a little too lighthearted for the book, for the environment and all that kind of stuff. And she also had a book that kind of poked fun in the 30s about the fascist movement, and it kind of pokes fun at Hitler, and her sister, who was so into that whole movement that in hindsight, actually, they wanted her to republish it and she wouldn't, because she's like, it's not funny anymore. Like when she was doing it, she had no idea when she wrote it what was to come.
Right.
She's like, this is not,
Well, and it sounds
it's
like
not funny.
yeah, and it caused a real rift between her and her
Yeah, it
sister.
sure did.
And these sisters are not all close, but I think that wasn't funny, as you said. It wasn't funny and it wasn't fun to her and to her sister.
Yes, exactly, exactly. And so it was kind of like so she had, she, like, I think her first book did okay, and then she had two more, and then the huge flop, and it was like, okay. And her publisher, when it was kind of like, she really had to think about what that fifth book was going to be. And every time she would bring something up, her publisher was kind of like, yeah, I don't think so. That doesn't sound good. So, I can relate to that very much. And Katie, the fictional character Katie, can too. And many writers can, right? And especially if you have success in one type of book, well, of course the publishers aren't going to want you to write something so different if you had success writing about whatever it happens to be, because you had success and people generally want more of that.
Yeah, absolutely. If you can possibly replicate that success, they want you to do that and then do it 10 more times, because
Yes,
it's the
exactly.
sure thing.
Yes, exactly.
We have a question from a reader, Anissa, who wants to know, what was your biggest hurdle in writing this book?
Oh gosh, that's tough. It was just very hard because she was a real person, and there was so much written about her, not written about her necessarily, but all her letters. So staying true to that. And also, just, I wrote it during the pandemic. I mean, we're still in the pandemic, but in lockdown,
Yeah.
which had its pluses because you're not going anywhere, but you're not, as we can, literally everybody can attest, you're not always in that great mental state, especially in those early months. I started writing this book in February 2020, at
That's
the
a
end of
tough
it.
time. Yeah.
Yeah. And so you're not always in a good state of mind. And so I would say that piece of it, I struggled a lot with how to incorporate Nancy's life. She lived a long time. She did a lot. And then she had, her sisters did to incorporate it all and not have like some 900-page book. I mean, it was much, my first draft, was probably twice as long as that ended up. I had to cut back. So it was trying to find the nugget of story. You don't want to just recite facts like this happened and this happened, right? There has to be a story. So it was finding that nugget of a story, because we sold it on a proposal in some chapters.
Mm-hmm.
So, I was under contract, but it was just couple of chapters is all I had. But I will say it was kind of interesting because, a lot of this takes place during the Blitz or even after the Blitz, but when there's still air raids. And it was like, Nancy's going out to dinner and they're carrying their gas masks or whatever. And you're like, God, you could kind of relate to that thing of like, there's so much horrible out here that you're still trying to get on with your life. You could relate to that, like, okay, at a certain point, you just want to go out to dinner with your friends. At a certain point, you just want to, do these things. And even if the world feels like it's falling down around you, sometimes you just want to have fun. So I can relate to that piece.
Yeah. And it's one of the things that kind of struck me was the number of people who want to continue on with their lives as they were before, or they continue to have these conversations. But at some point she says, somebody tried to commission me to write an article about slimming during rationing when people can't get enough food.
Yeah,
and she kind of has this moment like, you can take it too far.
Yeah, exactly. Like I couldn't, and that really happened to her. She was like, I don't think so. And then she had the one friend that was like, oh, nobody dies in air raids. It's just like a bunch of, noise and mess. And she's like, oh, well, I don't think that's true exactly.
Yeah. And you really get the sense that some of these people that she was around really kind of lived in this rarefied world where they felt very protected. But the reality is that was what was so frightening about the Blitz, was that it could absolutely harm or kill anybody at any time.
Right. They didn't care what you were doing, who you were, what you were doing. Yeah.
And parts, Mayfair and other places, but that been incredibly expensive, very sought after property for a very long time, absolutely were bombed because
Yeah,
there were strategic locations and things were important, in those areas.
absolutely.
So they got bombed like the rest of London
Yeah,
did.
exactly, exactly.
Yeah, it does make you wonder about people sometimes.
I know, exactly.
We have a couple more questions, including one from Christine, who asks, "Did you find out something about Nancy or any of the siblings that shocked you as part of your research?"
I get that question a lot, and nothing shocked me only because they were already so shocking, and I knew that. I thought it was one thing that was very interesting to me. It was more interesting than shocking, but Decca, who was the communist sister,
Mhm.
she was more about like, it wasn't, she eventually broke with the Communist Party. For her, it was more about the peace. Like she was very anti-war. So
Right.
they were the peace party. So for her, it was more about like, why are we having these wars? And she emigrated to California. And this probably stuck with me too, because I'm from California, but she emigrated to California during the war, and her first husband died. And her second, she became very active in civil rights. She married a civil rights attorney. She was very active in civil rights. Her best friend was Maya Angelou, which I thought was so cool. And her husband, one of his interns was Hillary Rodham, which I thought was so
Really?
interesting. I don't,
I
yeah.
didn't know
So
that.
yeah, all these weird connections of that. Like I just thought Decca's life was so interesting how she left England. So to me, her kind of trajectory, was very fascinating. Just and some of the little family stories were shocking in that the Mitfords were kind of shocking people. um, and I also think the extent to which was surprising, was how there were a lot of these people in her world were sent off to boarding school at, the boys were sent off to boarding school like age 8, and there were a lot, most of boys had at some point at least dabbled in a same-sex relationship, and that was just kind of like accepted in
Mhm.
a way that was surprising to me. For the 20s and the 30s, it was just kind of like
Well,
accepted.
especially homosexuality wasn't decriminalized until well after that too. So it's
Yes.
it's this weird double standard of in the upper classes, it kind of, so long as you're not really making a fuss, it's
Right.
okay.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. It's like, yeah, so they're not harming anyone or what. And people, some of her people in her world were very out about it, and it was
Mhm.
just not really remarked upon all that much. At least, from the, you know, stuff that, be like, oh, his boyfriend, his little boy toy, whatever, but it wasn't said derogatorily. It was just like, oh, then we went out to dinner with them. And I don't know. That was kind of interesting and surprising.
Yeah. What do you think it is about the Mitfords that we keep being drawn back to, people who are interested in them and people who discover this family?
I think I'm a little, and again, my last book was about the Kennedys, and I think it's a similar dynamic. It's these people that seem like they have it all, and they're like, the Mitfords didn't have the wealth, even though they had the appearance of wealth, they have the title, and it's like these people that are gorgeous, they have the title, they're in these rarefied air, they're very lauded, they're well known, but then they're just like a mess like the rest of us.
Yeah.
Arguably the Mitfords are more of a mess than the rest of us. Same with the Kennedys, but I think it's just that kind of interesting, and they're all, the Mitfords were all incredibly smart. Like she was so smart, her sisters were all smart. They were all, and the father was against, he did not believe girls should be educated. He's like, what's the point? You just need to learn French and how to ride a horse. And that's very hard to contain, girls with big ideas and big personalities. And I think that's some of the reason some of the sisters went to extremes in their
Mhm.
politics. It was like trying to like, look at me, I have ideas, like let me have an idea, let me stand up for what I believe in. And so for the Mitfords, that to me is very fascinating, how they were all so different in the same environment, but you can see why they would develop these extreme personalities and extreme, because they were brilliant girls, all of them.
Well, it's interesting too, because I think maybe without the proximity to fascism and Hitler, especially with Unity, who famously shoots herself when war is
Yeah.
declared, and had been a confidant of Hitler, as you said, and then Diana is a whole mess in and of
Yes.
herself. I wonder whether some of it is just because they're around this incredibly um, important figure to what happened in the 20th century. I mean, he shaped what happened in Europe and obviously the World War. I wonder
Yeah,
whether some of that is also what kind of continues to compel us to be
I
drawn to
think
them
so.
and to try to understand
Absolutely.
them.
Yeah. I absolutely, because they were in such close proximity to Hitler and to other, I mean, they were related to Churchill. There was, other, they were kind of on the scene for all
Mhm.
these things that you said shaped Europe.
Yeah, they're a really fascinating family, and that biography that you held up of the sisters, I
Yes.
think I picked it up one day, and it's a big book. It's not
Oh yeah,
small by any means.
yeah.
I
Yeah.
think I got through it in 2 days. It was so readable, and if people are
So
interested, because
readable. Yes.
I know we have some people who've said that they've read the book
Oh,
on who are watching right now. So if you're interested in the Mitford, it's really a fantastic book to read.
yeah, I think it'd be good on audio too. It's like
Yeah,
one of those ones I
absolutely.
think would probably be really good. I love nonfiction on audio, but yeah, like you said, it's so readable, even though it's huge.
Yes, exactly. What's We've had a couple questions in the comments about your writing process for this book. Can you talk a little bit about what your writing process is like in general and if that's changed due to the pandemic?
Well, it did change because I do like to write in my office, and so one of my daughters overtook my office, so it was kind of wherever I could find the space in the house, usually in my bedroom, which not ideal, but
Mhm.
that's what I had to do. I do a bit of research at the beginning to make sure I have enough. I don't want to over research because then you don't know where all the pieces are going to fall. I just want enough. So I'm like, okay, I know basically what's going to happen, and I can fix the details later
Sure.
of little historical details that I'm going to get wrong if I'm just guessing. And then I do outline the story, not super detailed, but enough where where like the major plot turning points are.
Mhm.
And then I'll do a semi-detailed outline, but not super maybe like a page or two, and then I'll start writing. But the outline changes as I go, and then I just have a daily word count that I try to hit. And it didn't really changed during the pandemic, that piece of it, other than some days it was really hard. I would just
Yeah.
I'd like pop in a meditation app and I'm like, okay. And I'd be like, okay, another meditation. I'm like, okay, you can't like meditate your way through this book, Michelle. You're going to actually have to write it at some point. Like the
There is a
meditation's
part of
good.
being a writer where you do have to put your hands on the
Yeah.
keyboard.
I'm
You're
like,
right.
meditation's very good, but I don't think that's going to write this book for you. I wrote so some of my prior books. I didn't do it so much for this book, but I've traditionally written a lot by hand.
Mhm.
Um, my girls play softball, and so I would not want to take my computer, especially when I was working full time and writing, and we didn't have a nanny or anything, and you have to get there early for warm up. So I'd bring my notebook and I'd write in the stands. So I have done a lot of because to me it's really right wherever you can get the time and get the words in. So sometimes that is at a game or in your
Mhm.
car at pickup or drop off or whatever. So I've done a lot of handwriting in the past, and I do find that helps me. Sometimes that I'll use that as a trick to if I'm like my focus isn't great, because then you can't look something up and be like, oh, what did hats look like in 1943, and then 2
Right.
hours later, which I'm very good at doing that.
Oh, same here.
And and so I will do that if I'm trying to get more in touch with like get directly into the writing, and then kind of gives you a next layer of editing. And then my other big hack is I always and I'm sure you can very much relate to this, that the hardest part is like starting, right? Like opening the file, starting.
Yeah.
So I always stop when I don't want to stop when things are going well. So that way, when I want to pick it up the next day, I'm in the middle of something, it's I think Hemingway did that, but then I'm never staring at a blank page. I'm never staring at chapter 3.
Right.
you know I'm always like, okay, I need to get back because I need to finish that thought, I need to finish that. So that helps keep me motivated, because as you know, opening the file is the hardest part.
I find that to be really helpful too, and it's a trick I've been using on the book that I'm writing right now of leaving sometimes even in the middle of a conversation, in the
Oh, I
middle of
do
a bit
that
of
for
dialogue.
sure.
It just there's something about it where you kind of I tend to do a skim over it and I don't really even edit it or touch it, because I'm very much a sort of, if you leave me with a chapter to edit, I'll edit it and I'll never
Oh
move
yeah.
on. So
Yes.
I very early on learned this about myself, and now I'm very disciplined about when I'm writing the first draft, unless things are going catastrophically wrong, I'll just move forward and I can always fix it later, but I need to write
Yeah.
the rest of it and then I can go back and fix it. And I find starting in the middle of those scenes to be really useful. You're right. If I've accidentally, the worst is if you accidentally finish a chapter, close your laptop on Friday, and open it up again on Monday morning and just think, well, what was I thinking? What am I going to
Why
do
did I do that?
next?
Yeah, you're like, I don't know. Anyone have any ideas? And you bring up a good point, which I've done the book I'm writing now. It's like the first time I've done a good, usually in the past, I would go back and maybe edit what I did the day before. But like you said, I could edit all day long. And you don't know, as you get to the end of the book, that chapter might even be gone
Yeah.
because you don't need that. So I've been trying very much not to go back and do that, and just to keep going forward, because I think that it is easy, and then you're like changing he to Bob back to he, and you're like, what am I doing? This is like, you'll find the perfect word for this sentence at some other, or like, you're like, this sentence is funny, and then I'm like, no, you gotta worry about the plot right now, you can worry about the sentences later.
Exactly. Is there a particular part of the whole process from sort of, initially, crafting the idea all the way through to publishing? Is there a part you prefer doing? Do you have a favorite?
Well, I do love doing the research, but that's can also be an excuse to not do the work. So I've the end is the easiest for me. Um, like usually I'm writing like, and I just finished writing the book, my sixth book. And I mean, I was writing like 4 or 5,000 words a day, which is a lot for me.
Mhm.
Like I that momentum, once you get to the end and you can see the finish line, that's my favorite part, because you're really
It's
like,
great.
okay, I'm there, I can do it. Like you can see it, you can feel it, and you almost like, it's like you can't get there fast enough. And it's very exciting. But then of course you have to go into editing, which is, not quite as exciting, but
It's a lot more work.
more important, but
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. I find that the beginning is very exciting because it's like, oh, I have a new project.
yes,
This is
yes,
something that I haven't worked on yet. The middle is
totally.
terrible. And then
Yeah.
the last like 10 to 15,000 words is usually pretty exciting because as you say, you kind of can't get it out of your brain and onto the page
And
fast
you can
enough.
feel it. You can like feel that momentum. And what I'm doing differently this time for editing is not editing from the start. Like
I
I'm
love doing that. And people
so
always look at me like I'm crazy, but it
yes.
works. If your brain works
Yes,
that
it's
way, it works really well.
yeah. So I'm like, okay, what is like the most problematic? Because you kind of know, like, okay, this part of the plot's a little shaky, so like go in to that part instead of starting at the beginning. So I find that's helpful.
Yeah, I find that I lose steam if I'm not careful. If I do a big edit where I start at the beginning, I start to
Yeah.
kind of peter out towards the end. So I'd rather kind of be editing across a lot of different parts and then do a big continuity edit, which is really
Right.
just kind of
At the
lightly
end.
making sure, right, making sure everything
Yes.
makes sense. I haven't killed somebody
Right.
off and then brought them back to life and killed them
Right.
off again or anything like that.
Exactly. Yeah. So that's actually new for me. So it's kind of fun, because I think it's better. In some ways it's harder because you're not going start to finish, but I think it's going to be better in the long run. Because like you said, because it's very easy to lose steam after you're like, okay, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Do you find that having sample chapters, because I know you mentioned that you pitched this and then had the sample chapters as well, do you find those helpful to have once you know that the project is ready to go and you know that you have a book contract, or do you find that that's more difficult to kind of get restarted on the book?
I I don't. It's hard to say. Um, it's a little intimidating at times because it is hard to get restarted. I think, as you said. So it was kind of nice because I sold a 2 book contract, so I didn't have the sample chat. I just wrote this book, which I think I do prefer that, because
Yeah,
you're not
takes
waiting
some
to hear it.
pressure off.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and I did send the chapters to my agent, just to make sure she thought they were. But I kept writing, so it didn't feel like a disruption sort of
That's
thing
smart.
where I'm
Mhm.
like waiting to hear back. Like, okay, well, where do we? So I just kept writing. So I think I don't like doing it that way.
I can certainly understand that.
now
Yeah.
that you now that you mentioned it.
Well, you're always discovering new parts of the process,
I
I
know,
feel
and you
like, as
always
an
think you're
author.
you're always waiting for like that perfect nugget of information that's going to make it all easy,
I know,
which is
you
never
think.
going to happen.
No, it never happens. And one of the reasons is things change book to book. So like you said, you're
Totally.
doing something different with editing than you've ever done before. And I think that's one of the hardest things about answering people's questions around, do you have any advice for aspiring authors? And it's like, well, I do, but I don't even know what my writing process is going to look like for the
Exactly.
next book. So
Exactly.
it's a tricky one, but we've had a question about what you're reading now, which I did give you a heads up about beforehand, and I knew this was going to come up. So I'd love to hear if you have any recommendations, books that people might want to take a look at and add to their own to be read piles.
Yeah, well, I just started In Polite Company by Gervais Haggerty, which is really good. I'm only like 30 pages in. So I'm going to show you a couple of books I've read recently.
Wonderful.
So Our Darkest Night by Jennifer Robson. If you're in the mood for some World War II fiction, this takes place in Italy. So, and my sixth book takes place in Italy in World War II. So even though I said no more World War II, here we are. Embassy Wife by Katie Crouch. This was fascinating. It's exactly what it sounds like. A woman is an embassy wife. They're in an African country. I think they're in Namibia. That's right. And just kind of that culture, and something bad happens, and we go from there. And then this was very fun. Rock the Boat by Beck Dory Stein, and it's one of those, go back to your hometown, seaside community, but it's really smart, well written. She wrote a memoir that I love called From the Corner of the Oval, and she was the stenographer for Obama. So she was kind of doing the stenographer work, and so she's almost like, not that she wasn't important, but she's very much, a fly on the wall, like very much. And the memoir is fantastic, how she kind of just fell into this job. And some of her stories about Obama were hilarious. Like she would go on trips, and she'd work out in the morning. He'd be like in the hotel gym jogging next to her. And she's like, oh my God, I'm jogging next to the president. Like just crazy stories. So that I really recommend it. And then Once There Were Wolves. This is an incredible book, Charlotte McConaughey. I read her other book, Migrations, which is fantastic. It's about, they're not doing this in Scotland, but it's based on what they did in Yellowstone, trying to repopulate and rewild certain areas. Yes. So it's Scotland, and they're reintroducing wolves to the area because, first of all, they'll eat the deer, and the deer are taking away the vegetation. So it will hopefully get the landscape back. And it's a woman who is working on this project, but there's a murder, or is it one of the wolves that did it? Is it something else? And of course, she's trying to say, like, the wolves aren't going to kill people. She cares about the wolves, and so she's trying to. Right. So it's got that environmental component, and it's so good. I mean, I loved her last book. This has been getting a lot of attention, I think, and rightly so. It was so compelling, so propulsive. I just loved it. So that's wonderful. What I've been reading recently. These are the past couple of weeks I've read.
Those are some new ones to me too, other than Jennifer Robson's Our Darkest Night. She was a guest on the show actually as well, back in January. So that
that's a great book.
It's a good one to go back and take a look at. Wonderful. I love getting new recommendations myself as well.
Yes, me too.
Well, this has been absolutely fantastic, and I really appreciate you taking the time. I want to make sure that you get a couple of minutes to, of course, talk about where people can get the book, and also if they want to follow you online as well, to make sure that they know any updates, things like that.
Yep. So I'm on Instagram and Twitter at mgablewriter, MGABLE writer, and my website is michellegable.com. If you want to shoot me an email or have any questions about anything, feel free to reach out. And you can buy my books online at your local, I always support local indies or libraries. It's been it was like a library journal starred pick. So I love the library support, because I was one of those kids that would, go to the library, check out 10 books and have to go back the next day. So I love libraries. So they should be. And I think what a lot of people don't know is if your library doesn't have a specific book, you can ask them to get it for you, and they'll usually buy a copy. So
yeah, if they know that people want it, why not?
Yeah.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for
thank you so much.
And hopefully spreading the word about the Mitfords a little wider. I'm so excited to see if more people are excited about talking about these ladies, because they're just fascinating. No matter what you think about them, they're really interesting. Yes. And this book is a fantastic way of sort of getting into that world.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much. That was so fun.
Of course. Well, thank you guys so much, and I will see you next week.